be diverting our attention towards the left to right shunts that we discussed previously, in which we included atrial septal defects, ventricular septal defects, patent ductus arteriosus, and the patent foramen ovale. Atrial septal defects or ASDs are abnormal fixed openings in the atrial septum caused by incomplete tissue formation that allows communication of blood between the left and the right atria. ASDs are usually asymptomatic until adulthood. They constitute about 10% of all congenital heart defects. There is female to male preponderance, and they should not be confused with patent foramen ovale, which represents the failure to close a foramen. Defects in the interatrial septum are not physiological, they are pathological, whereas a foramen ovale was initially a part of the normal physiology of the fetus. Look at the morphology of it. So the 90% of the atrial septal defects are known as secundum ASDs, which are basically the result of incomplete formation of the septum secundum. 5% of these are primum anomalies, which are caused by excessive resorption of septum primum. And 5% of them are sinus venosus defect, which occur near the entrance of the SVC into the right atrium. Clinical features of atrial septal defect. Atrial septal defects usually result in a left to right shunt, largely because pulmonary vascular resistance is considerably less than the systemic vascular resistance, and because the desensibility of the right ventricle is more than that of the left ventricle. As we know, sensibility is delta V divided by delta P into the original volume of the chamber, where delta V indicates the change in volume by every 1 unit increment in pressure. And due to this left to right shunt, the pulmonary blood flow may be about 2 to 8 times normal, and a murmur is often present as a result of the excessive flow through the pulmonary valve and or through the atrial septal defect. And they usually do not become symptomatic before 30 years, and the mortality is generally low, and long-term survival is comparable to that of the normal population. Before discussing the other left to right shunt, I would like to divert your attention towards the mechanism of closure of the PDA and the PFO after birth, that is the patent ductus arteriosus and the patent foramen ovale after birth, which are usually not patent. So the ductus arteriosus arises from the pulmonary artery and joins the aorta just distal to the region of the left subclavian artery. And during intrauterine life, it permits blood to flow from the pulmonary artery into the aorta, and hence bypassing the yet underdeveloped and unoxygenated lung. Shortly after birth, in healthy term infants, the ductus constricts and is functionally closed after 1 to 2 days. Same happens to the foramen ovale, which is present between the left and the right atrium. This happens when the infant starts breathing, which leads to a fall in the pulmonary vascular resistance as a result of the increased oxygen that is being taken in by the infant. So a fall in the pulmonary vascular resistance leads to an increase in the left atrial pressure, and due to the increase of flow into the pulmonary artery, we get an increase in the amount of pressure that is in the left atrium. There is establishment of a pressure gradient between the left atrium and the right atrium, and that leads to the closure of the foramen ovale. And an increase in concentration of oxygen and a decrease in concentration of prostaglandins E2 as a result of the placental separation will lead to closure of the ductus arteriosus. PGE2 keeps the patent ductus arteriosus open while endomethacin closes. Now let's just discuss the patent ductus arteriosus. So ductal closure is often delayed or even absent in infants with hypoxia, as we will not have an increase in O2, which ultimately leads to the closure of the ductus arteriosus, or when the PDA occurs in association with other congenital defects such as ventricular septal defects that increase the pulmonary vascular pressure. The incidence of patent ductus arteriosus is about 7%, wherein 90% of them are isolated defects that are not associated with other congenital abnormality. There is a very characteristic murmur that is heard in a patent ductus arteriosus, and it is also referred to as a machine-like murmur. So initially, being a left to right shunt, there will be no cyanosis, but later right to left shunt can take place. In conditions where obstructions occur in the pulmonary on the systemic outflow tract, preservation of the ductal patency may be life-saving. For example, in aortic valve atresia, where we have a complete obstruction of the aortic valve, the patent ductus, that is between the pulmonary trunk and the aorta, shall form the only source of blood to the different organs. Now let's discuss the patent foramen ovale, another congenital defect that is associated with the left to right shunt. In 80% of the individuals, the foramen ovale closes by 2 years, and in the remaining 20%, this unsealed flap can open if right sided pressure become elevated, such as in conditions like sneezing, coughing, or bowel movements. Due to the opening of the foramen ovale, there can be a right to left shunting, which can ultimately lead to cyanosis. The last of the left to right shunts that we will discuss is ventricular septal defect. Ventricular septal defects are the most common of the isolated congenital heart defects, in which 20 to 30% of them are isolated, that are not being associated with other congenital abnormalities. Most of the ventricular septal defects are therefore associated with other congenital anomalies such as tetralogy of Fallot. They can occur either in the membranous part of the ventricular septum, or they can occur in the infundibular or the muscular part of the interventricular septum. Initially, there is a left to right shunting, which will ultimately lead to right ventricular hypertrophy and an increase in the pulmonary artery pressure, and that can lead to reversal of the shunt, which can ultimately lead to cyanosis and death. Pretty much sums it up, the congenital heart defects that are associated with the left to right. Now we shall discuss in detail the reasons behind malformations causing a right to left shunt. The diseases in this group cause early cyanosis in the postnatal period, as discussed previously while discussing the clinical features of right to left shunt. Due to this reason, they are also known as cyanotic congenital heart disease. With an incidence of about 5% of all CHDs, tetralogy of Fallot is the most common in this group. It is referred to as a tetralogy due to its 4 cardinal features, which include pulmonary infundibular stenosis. So there is a stenosis at the level of the infundibule of the right ventricle, which was derived embryologically from the conus cordis and forms the right outflow tract till the pulmonary valve. Secondly, we have right ventricular hypertrophy. The third feature includes an overriding aorta. The aorta overrides the ventricular septal defect. That is, it arises directly above the septal defect. So if this is the ventricular septal defect, which is the fourth feature of this tetralogy. These features can easily be memorized through the mnemonic proof, in which P stands for pulmonary infundibular stenosis, R stands for right ventricular hypertrophy, O stands for overriding aorta, and V stands for ventricular septal defect. The cause of tetralogy of Fallot is an unequal division of the conus resulting from the anterior superior displacement of the conotruncal. Due to this anterior superior displacement, we have narrowing of the right ventricle outflow tract. The major cause behind tetralogy of Fallot includes Alagille syndrome, which we saw previously was a mutation in the Notch2 receptor or the Jagged1 transmembrane ligand for the Notch2 receptor. And we had the fetal alcohol syndrome. Due to this right ventricular hypertrophy, we get a boot-shaped heart on chest X-ray. The obstruction to the right ventricular outflow tract is most often due to narrowing of the infundibulum, that is a subpulmonic stenosis. But it can also be accompanied by a pulmonary valvular stenosis. And sometimes there is a complete atresia, that is the complete obstruction of the pulmonary valve and variable portion of the pulmonary artery, such that blood through a patent ductus arteriosus, dilated bronchial arteries, or both is necessary for survival. As we discussed previously, we have a situation in which a patent ductus arteriosus is always beneficial for the patient, as in aortic atresia, and we have complete pulmonary infundibular atresia or a stenosis. So the clinical features that are associated with tetralogy of Fallot depend upon the degree of the infundibular stenosis. More the degree of the infundibular stenosis, more will be the hypoplastic pulmonary artery, and more shall be the features of an overriding aorta. And sometimes we get an unusual phenomena known as a pink tetralogy, and pink refers to the loss of cyanosis that is often seen in this tetralogy. So whenever there is a subpulmonary stenosis which is mild, subpulmonary stenosis will resemble an isolated ventricular septal defect, and due to this isolated ventricular septal defect, we will only give the left to right shunting and no right to left shunting, and then hence there will be no cyanosis. In tetralogy of Fallot, we also get something known as TET spells, which are acute hypoxia spells, and they're usually initiated by anxiety, pain, dehydration, or fever. The main reason behind these TET spells is a decrease in the oxygen saturation or the decrease in the systemic vascular resistance. Due to this fall in the systemic vascular resistance, we get an ease of blood flowing from the right hand side to the left hand side of the circulation. And often TET spells are relieved on squatting. So the mechanism behind the relief in tetralogy of Fallot on squatting is, when a patient with tetralogy of Fallot squats, he increases the systemic vascular resistance by compressing the veins in the lower extremities. And what that will result in an increase in systemic vascular resistance will decrease the amount of right to left shunting that occurs, and hence will improve the cyanosis. Next, we have transposition of the great arteries. Transposition of the great arteries produces a ventricular arterial discordance. The aorta lies anterior and rises from the right ventricle, and the pulmonary artery lies posterior and thereby arises from the left ventricle. The atrium to ventricular connections are normal, except in ventricular inversion or LTGA. So due to this ventricular arterial discordance, we will have a right ventricular hypertrophy, and we will have an atrophic left ventricle. In about 35% of the cases, we usually have a transposition of the great artery plus a ventricular septal defect. So we get a stable shunt. But in the remaining 65% of the cases, dependence on a patent foramen ovale or a ductus arteriosus is problematic, as these connections tend to close early and thus require intervention to create a new shunt. Next, we have tricuspid atresia. As we know, atresia means a complete obstruction. So here is a complete occlusion of the tricuspid valve. The reason behind this is that embryologically it arises from the unequal division of the atrioventricular canal. So we will get a right ventricular hyperplasia, and the circulation can be maintained by a right to left shunt through an interatrial communication, in addition to a ventricular septal defect that affords communication between the left ventricle and the pulmonary artery arising from the hypoplastic right ventricle. In these cases, we have a cyanosis which is present virtually from birth. Lastly, we have a persistent truncus arteriosus. As we all know, the truncus arteriosus give rise to the outflow tract of both the right ventricle and the left ventricle. In this situation, the truncus fails to properly divide the pulmonary trunk and the aorta, and hence this shall result in one arterial trunk that provides mixed blood to the coronary artery, the pulmonary artery, and the systemic circulation. And hence, we get one single artery arising from both the two ventricles, which ultimately shall give rise to both the aortic and the pulmonary channel. Due to the absence and the improper development of the conotruncal ridges, we will have a ventricular septal defect, and ultimately we will have pulmonary hypertension and abnormal truncal valve. Now, let us just discuss the only remaining part, that is malformations causing an obstructive lesion. Congenital obstruction to blood flow can occur at the level of the heart valves or within a great vessel. Common examples included in this malformation include aortic or pulmonary valve stenosis or atresia and coarctation of the aorta. Just remember, obstruction can also occur within a chamber, as with subpulmonary stenosis seen in tetralogy of Fallot. Coarctation of the aorta ranks high in frequency, and it constitutes about 5% of all CHTs. It is much more common in males, and interestingly so, it is also common in phenotypic females who have Turner syndrome, XO. So there are two types of coarctation of the aorta. We have an infantile type and we have an adult type. Before proceeding into these two types of coarctation of the aorta, let's just understand the pathogenesis of the coarctation of the aorta. The pathogenesis of coarctation of the aorta reflects the pattern of flow in the ductus arteriosus in the fetal life. During fetal life, the ductus arteriosus has more blood as compared to the aortic valve flowing through it. The blood leaving the ductus arteriosus right here, it is diverted into cephalad and a caudad by something known as the posterior shell opposite the orifice of the ductus arteriosus. So it passes cephalad into the relatively hypoplastic aortic isthmus, and it also is carried caudally into the thoracic aorta to supply the lower extremity. Now, in late fetal life, the increasing left ventricular output dilates the isthmus and bypasses the obstruction through the wide ductal orifice. So what we have is we get a dilated aortic isthmus late in the fetal life, and that will lead to the bypass of this obstruction caused by the posterior shelf. Pathogenesis between the infantile type and the adult type results from two distinct lesions. If due to any reason we have a persistence of a narrowed aortic isthmus, we get something known as the infantile type, or we call it the preductal type of coarctation of the aorta. For some reason, we also get a situation in which posterior shelf does not go involution. In that cases, we get a persistent posterior shelf which shall serve as the obstruction to the flow of the aorta. So that is responsible for the adult type of coarctation of the aorta. Now, the major clinical manifestation depend on one simple fact, that is, if the coarctation of the aorta is present with a patent ductus arteriosus or it is present without a patent ductus arteriosus. If the coarctation of the aorta is present with a patent ductus arteriosus, it manifests early in life, and it causes signs and symptoms immediately after birth, and we get a cyanosis that is localized to the lower half of the body. As you shall remember, whenever we get a coarctation of the aorta at any level, just proximal to that level, we shall get hypertension. So if this coarctation is occurring at the level of the ductus arteriosus, proximal to the ductus arteriosus, we shall get hypertension in the upper extremities, whereas just distal to the lesion, we get hypotension in the lower extremities, which is often seen clinically as hypotension in lower extremities. We get coldness and claudication of the limbs. So without PDA, it is often asymptomatic and just results in a mild form of a disease. Now, we shall discuss the second lesion that often occurs in malformation causing an obstruction, that is pulmonary stenosis and atresia. Pulmonary stenosis or atresia is a relatively frequent malformation leading to obstruction at the level of the pulmonary valve. This can be mild to severe. The lesion can also be isolated or a part of a more complex anomaly. either tetralogy of Fallot or the transposition of the great arteries. So we often get pulmonary stenosis in cases such as congenital rubella infection, Noonan syndrome, as we discussed previously, Alagille syndrome. Sometimes whenever there is a coexistent subpulmonary stenosis, as we saw in tetralogy of Fallot, we don't get a pulmonary trunk that is dilated. Instead, the pulmonary trunk may in fact be hypoplastic in those situations. Closing our discussion with terminally discussing the aortic stenosis and atresia, 80% of it occurs isolated, not associated with any complex anomaly. The stenosis can occur at three levels. It can occur at the level of the valve, and hence we call it valvular aortic stenosis. It can occur below the valve, and hence subvalvular of subaortic stenosis, or it can occur superiorly to the valve, or we call it supravalvular aortic stenosis. So valvular aortic stenosis, the most common of the valvular aortic stenosis is a bicuspid aortic valve, and whenever the obstruction is severe, we shall get manifestations that are quite resembling the hypoplastic left heart syndrome. Now, discussing the subvalvular or the subaortic stenosis. So in the subvalvular or the subaortic stenosis, which constitutes about 10% of all cases, it is a thickened ring or collar of dense endocardial fibrous tissue just below the level of the cusp. And in a supravalvular aortic stenosis, these lesions are often associated with a syndrome known as Williams-Bruin syndrome, which is often characterized by periorbital fullness or puffy eyes, long philtrum, tail party type personality, supravalvular aortic stenosis, as we are seeing, and hypercalcemia. This syndrome occurs often due to a deletion at the long arm of the 7th chromosome that carries the elastin gene. So the elastin gene mutations may cause supravalvular stenosis by disrupting elastin smooth cell interaction during aortic morphogenesis. You can get at the level of the valvular stenosis that can occur at the level of the valve, or we can get a subvalvular stenosis, that is a thickened ring of endocardial tissue, or we can get a supravalvular stenosis as we saw in Williams syndrome. That concludes our discussion of congenital heart diseases.